So let's talk about the interview. Is it a noble search for the truth, or is it a crime? It's pretty much the foundation of modern journalism, but for more than 100 years, it has been one of the most debated, most controversial forms of communication out there. Today, we're going to get into the messy, complicated, and often contradictory world of the journalistic interview. Okay, let's just jump right in with a haymaker of a quote. The legendary author of The Jungle Book, Rudyard Kipling, well, he didn't just dislike interviews, he flat out condemned them. For him, they were a deep personal violation, basically an attack. And trust me, he was not the only one who felt this way. The Nobel Prize winner Saul Bellow used this incredibly visceral image to describe the feeling, like thumbprints on his windpipe. I mean, wow, you can practically feel the suffocation, the personal assault, in just that one phrase. So right away, you see the two warring camps we're talking about. On one side, you have the interview as this noble quest, a way to get to the truth. And on the other, it's seen as this gross, unwelcome intrusion. Some even said it was like having a piece of your soul stolen. And this wasn't just some fringe opinion held by a couple of grumpy writers. No. We are talking about a who's who of literary giants. V.S. Naipaul believed people were literally wounded by interviews. And Lewis Carroll, the guy who created Alice in Wonderland, he had what was called a just horror of interviewers, and he refused to speak to them his entire life. All right, let's really lean into this first perspective for a minute, the idea of the interview as an actual crime. Kipling's view was, honestly, extreme. He wasn't just saying it was impolite. He actually put being interviewed on the same level as being physically assaulted, something he thought should be punished. In fact, his wife Caroline once wrote in her diary that their entire day was wrecked by two reporters from Boston. But, and this is where the story takes a really interesting twist, the very same man who called interviewing a crime, who said it was like being attacked, well, he had committed that exact same assault himself just a few years before. And get this, who was his victim? None other than the great American writer Mark Twain. So yeah, one of the most ferocious critics of the interview was an interviewer. It just shows you how tangled and, frankly, how hypocritical this whole debate can get. So that really begs the question, right? Does an interview have to be a fight, an attack, a battle of wills? Or could it be something else entirely, a way to actually connect, to reveal something new? Let's look at a case where it was definitely the second one. To see that other side of the coin, we have to talk about Umberto Eco. He was an Italian professor who became this global intellectual superstar. And along the way, he pretty much perfected the art of being interviewed. First, you just have to understand how famous this guy was. His novel, The Name of the Rose, which is a really dense historical book, by the way, sold somewhere between 10 and 15 million copies. That is just a staggering number. But here's what makes his story so fascinating. He was also this incredibly serious academic. He published over 40 heavy, scholarly nonfiction works. So the big question everyone had was, how on earth could one person be both of these things at once? And when an interviewer asked him exactly that, how he managed this double life, his answer was so simple and so perfect. He said, "I consider myself a university professor who writes novels on Sundays." For him, the fiction was just a weekend hobby. His real job, his identity, was being a professor. Okay, so if he was just a Sunday novelist, how did he write so much? Well, when an interviewer asked him that, he let them in on a little secret to his incredible productivity. And here it is. This is the kind of amazing insight that you can really only get from a good conversation. Eco explained that his whole secret was using the empty spaces in our lives, and he had this wonderful name for them, interstices. So what in the world are interstices? Well, Eco described them as all those little moments we usually just waste. You know, the time you spend waiting for an elevator, or standing in line at the grocery store, or just sitting in a doctor's waiting room. All those little gaps of time. And he gave his interviewer this perfect, unforgettable example. He laughed and said, "While waiting for your elevator to come up from the first to the third floor, I have already written an article." See? That's it. That's the kind of brilliant, useful idea that a great interview can bring to light. That same interview also gave us a peek into how he wrote. His academic stuff wasn't all dry and boring. It was actually playful, almost like a story. And the interview got him to explain why. He said a professor once told him he was great at telling the story of his research. That lesson stuck with him, and thanks to that interview, we all got to learn it too. And what about the insane success of his really difficult novel? Well, the interview reveals that publishers were totally confused by it. They had this idea that people just want to read trash. But Eco used the interview to make his case that, no, you're wrong. A huge number of people are actually looking for a challenge. It's an amazing insight that we only got because somebody thought to ask. So we're left with these two totally opposite pictures. On the one hand, you've got Kipling's Assault and Bellows' thumbprints, the interview as a violation. And on the other, you have the Umberto Eco story, where the interview is this engine of pure revelation, unlocking ideas you just couldn't get any other way. In the end, it feels like the interview is just a tool, right? In the wrong hands, it can definitely feel like a weapon. But in the right hands, it can be a key that opens up a whole new world of understanding. So where do you fall on this? Is it a source of truth, or is it a soul-stealing crime? Maybe the answer has everything to do with who's asking the questions and who's giving the answers.